I'm here to see my father Ian, who is responsible, I think, mostly for my being called Crispin. And I'm going to find out why he did that, and also why he is so excited and enthusiastic about William Shakespeare. What inspired you to call me Crispin?
Well, of course, it was, as you will know very well, it was to do with the famous Crispin speech in Shakespeare's play Henry V. But we decided on your name before you were born, of course, and we both agreed that Crispin was a nice name for you. It's also worth pointing out that though some people think that it's a posh name, in fact, Crispin is the patron of shoemakers. So it's a very ordinary name. It isn't really very common these days, but it's a very ordinary name. And of course, it comes from the Crispin speech, which is a famous one in Henry V, in which he says, of course, "This day is called the Feast of Crispin. He that outlives this day and comes safe home will yearly on the vigil feast his neighbours. Then will he strip his sleeve and show his scars and say, 'These wounds I had on Crispin's day.'"
Okay. Look, I mean, it's hard to stop you once you've got going. Yeah. About that speech, I mean, that particular play, Henry V. I mean, there was a big film of that with Laurence Olivier. How old were you when that came out, and what was that sort of key to your by being inspired to become an actor and to
Well,
to like
I'll give a bit of
Shakespeare?
background. Yes, thank you very much. It was first of all, my father. I mean, my father actually left school at the age of 13 and went into the cotton mill in Preston. But by the time he was in his early 20s, he'd already started the Preston Shakespeare Society and was doing Shakespeare at a very early age. So Shakespeare was always there as part of my life from a very early age. And I even remember the drawer in a wardrobe in his bedroom in Preston, in which had the costumes from the plays he did as a young man in Shakespeare. But you're quite right, it was Laurence Olivier's first film as a director, which he made, Henry V. It was just before the end of the Second World War, and I think he'd been asked to do it in order to boost the morale of the British people. I saw it when I was very, very young, a very young boy, and I was knocked out by it. My father had already, well, both my parents loved the theatre, but my father, with his Shakespeare experience, of course, prepared me already for it. But Olivier's performance and the quality of the film were brilliant. It really did impress me, as you suggested, so much as a very young boy that I've loved Shakespeare ever since. And during my boyhood period and so on, I did go and see quite a lot of Shakespeare, including, I think I saw Michael Redgrave in Blackpool, in Macbeth and various other things like that.
So can I just sort of, you became an actor pretty young. I mean, you were a professional actor before you left university, isn't that?
Well, yes, that's almost right. I did a lot of acting when I was very young, school plays. There was a teacher called Alan Cullen, who was also a professional actor, and he cast me in leading parts in Shakespeare, but also in Sophocles in Oedipus Rex. So I did a lot of classical theatre before I started, but my main thing that I thought I would be studying was languages. I loved the French language and also did Spanish and things. But when I'd done further studies at university, I started to do more plays. I wrote some plays which were produced by student productions. I played the lead in Love's Labour's Lost, the leading part of Biron, and other plays, and then directed and played Hamlet, playing the part of Hamlet and directing the play. And that, in various ways, got me to get a leading part in a play with the Oxford Playhouse Company, which was then a residential repertory theatre. And so I made my professional debut with the Oxford Playhouse Company at the Gate Theatre in Dublin, in The Bad Samaritan by William Douglas Hume, who I think was the brother of the Prime Minister.
So how old were you then?
I'd be then in my early 20s.
Wow. You mentioned Love's Labour's Lost. You want to do a speech from that as one of your favourite speeches. Would you be able to do that now?
Yeah, if that's okay. I'll give a bit of the background story because it isn't as well known as some of the other plays. The plot of Love's Labour's Lost is when the King of Navarre and three of his courtiers, decide they will see no women, they will fast, and they will study and nothing else. However, the Princess of France arrives with three of her ladies in waiting, and one by one, without knowing the other ones, they all fall in love with one of them. So it makes them write love poems, and they're afraid to show it to the others, of course, so they go into the woods to read their poems aloud, one by one, and Biron, the part that I was playing, goes first, and he sees the others coming, so he climbs up a tree to hide, and he hears them all read their poems to the woman they fall in love with one by one. Then he slides down the tree and shows that he's heard them, and they all panic, and they say to him, please, please help us, Biron, excuse us, get us out of our problem. So this is what he says. Have you then affections, men-at-arms? Consider what you first did swear unto, to fast, to study, and to see no woman. Flat treason against the kingly state of youth. Say, can you fast? Your stomachs are too young, and abstinence engenders maladies. So we've made a vow to study, lords, and in that vow we have forsworn our books. For when would you, my liege, or you, in leaden contemplation have found out such fiery numbers as the prompting eyes of beauty's tutors have enriched you with? Other slow arts entirely keep the brain, and therefore finding barren practices scarce show a harvest of their heavy toil. But love, first learned in a lady's eyes, lives not alone immured in the brain, but with the motion of all elements courses as swift as thought in every power, and gives to every power a double power above their functions and their offices. It adds a precious seeing to the eye. A lover's eye would gaze an eagle blind. A lover's ear would hear the lowest sound when the suspicious head of theft is stopped. Love's feeling is more soft and sensible than are the tender horns of cockle snails. For valour, is not love a Hercules still climbing trees in the Hesperides, subtle as Sphinx, as sweet and musical as bright Apollo's lute strung with his hair? And when love speaks, the voice of all the gods make heaven drowsy with the harmony. Never durst poet touch pen to write until his ink were tempered with love sighs. Oh, then his lines would ravish savage ears and plant in tyrants mild humility. From women's eyes this doctrine I derive. They sparkle still the right Promethean fire. They are the books, the arts, the academes that show, contain and nourish all the world, else none at all in aught proves excellent. Then fools you were these women to forswear, or keeping what is sworn you will prove fools. Let us once lose our oaths to find ourselves, or else we lose ourselves to find our oaths. It is religion to be thus forsworn, for charity itself fulfills the law, and who can sever love from charity?
Would you say that Shakespeare was respected as the greatest writer by other people from other countries who speak different languages? What would you say his place is in the world's literature?
I would certainly say so, yes. In fact, with Deirdre, my wife, of course, your mother, we went to Moscow, and one of the most memorable things we had was when we decided that we'd go and see Richard III, Richard III, I think it is in Russian. It was in Russian, of course, and we decided we'd go and see it. And what was amazing, really, was the people running in their hundreds and hundreds, pouring into the theatre in Moscow to see Shakespeare in Russian, of course. So that was one. And I also, through good fortune, managed to tour some Shakespeare as well. I did the Hamlet with the National Theatre, and we went to Dubrovnik and to Tokyo and to Hong Kong, and the audiences were magnificent. I mean, it was always a full house and very, very popular, And the French have always liked it too, although they do, of course, stick with their own writers. They think that Molière and Racine and Corneille are great major writers, but in my view, though I love them too, you need to roll together Racine, Corneille and Molière, and you get Shakespeare, because he does comedies, histories, tragedies, and wonderful plays, and they translate very well into other languages.
The story this last week was that Keir Starmer's taken a portrait of Shakespeare down in Downing Street in number 10, which has made some headlines and people were shocked at this. But do you think that Shakespeare's given enough status in this country? What's your view on the way he's taught and and also how he's portrayed in culture? Do you think there's a lot of dumbing down of Shakespeare as well?
I think that it's given quite a good status, obviously, in the sense that the National Theatre and the Royal Shakespeare Company are wonderful and have been wonderful, and I happen to have been fortunate to work with both. But unfortunately, I think because many towns and cities now don't have their own independent theatres, they have to take, for commercial reasons, touring shows. So Shakespeare isn't very much seen these days, unfortunately. Shakespeare, of course, is still taught at school for, advanced level English literature, but you don't get the chance to see Shakespeare very much, which is a great shame. There are still quite a lot of wonderful recordings, of course, Laurence Olivier's Shakespeare's and Richard Burton's, I think Richard Burton did a Richard III, or I'm not quite sure, but anyway, there's some very good recordings of which you can still got there, but it is a shame that it isn't so much dumbing down as the fact that the theatres have shut down. And where in my early years, of course, there were 2 theatres in Preston, my native town, which ran all the time, 52 weeks a year. And of course, the West End of London used to be a premier place for new plays like John Osborne and Robert Bolt and so on and so on. Now it has a commercial basis, so it tends to do shows. So Shakespeare is not easy to find, and I do feel that many people, sadly, in this country don't get the taste of Shakespeare which they deserve. Shakespeare was not a posh writer. Let's bear that in mind. Shakespeare wrote plays on, famously, the so-called groundlings. That's to say the people who were illiterate, mainly men, but illiterate, they couldn't read or write. And the pit, as they used to call it, they still call it sometimes the pit in the theatre, would be full of these people, and they'd be watching Hamlet or Henry V or Richard III and cheering it, because there were people who couldn't read or write, but they loved the plays. And William Shakespeare was an amazing user of the English language. Nothing like it since, although there could be, of course, if we get the right chance.
I mean, the fact your father was performing Shakespeare and he worked in a cotton mill, I mean, that shows that when you were growing up, Shakespeare was accessible to working class people. I mean, do you think, as you say, it's almost like he's regarded as posh? I mean, it's not really the same anymore, is it? I mean, you don't see on the TV the same people being encouraged to watch Shakespeare. It looks too high end. What would you call it?
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, sometimes you do get sort of performances of Shakespeare which are a bit patronising in my view. They try to make it a bit more popular and so on, but you're quite right. The Shakespeare is not really as available now. The language of Shakespeare isn't all that different from contemporary language, except it's brilliantly rich and wonderful. But people don't get the opportunity to do it, mainly, I think, for commercial reasons. The idea now is you can write a new play, it'll probably get on it in the West End, and you'll also be able to sell it to America, probably translations of it into other countries. The commercial thing is, of course, important in any practice, but if you're going to get really good, serious art in the performance of William Shakespeare, as with music, really, if you want to have Beethoven and Mozart, you do need to have a special understanding and let the public at large, regardless of education, all get the benefit of enjoying William Shakespeare, the greatest writer, without question, the greatest writer who ever lived. Now, if I may, one of the most beautiful pieces of poetry ever written, one of Shakespeare's sonnets, the best known one. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more desperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair declines by chance, or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to town thou growest. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee.